Searching for a job shouldn't feel like a full-time job, but for many of us, it does. Between figuring out if you're qualified and wondering if anyone's even reading your application, the process can feel broken. LinkedIn is changing that, helping you explore better opportunities without the usual frustration. LinkedIn is reimagining the job search experience to help you confidently navigate your next move. I use LinkedIn regularly, and I've seen how its personalized insights can help all of us discover opportunities aligned with our skills and career goals. This year, LinkedIn is rolling out new AI-powered job search tools that go beyond keyword matching. They actually understand your intent and suggest roles tailored to your strengths. One feature I'm excited about is Job Match, which shows how well a job aligns with your background and gives you actionable next steps. Dare to discover what's next. Explore your job potential at linkedin.com/jobs. That's linkedin.com/jobs. Advancements in AI are not only revolutionizing work, they're shaping careers and opening up new possibilities. My name is Matt Abrahams, and I teach strategic communication at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Welcome to Think Fast, Talk Smart, the podcast. Today, I'm excited to once again be joined by Andrew Seaman, Senior Managing Editor for Jobs and Career Development at LinkedIn. Andrew joined me in episode 151. Andrew oversees a team of journalists and editors at LinkedIn who are focused on helping people navigate work and life. Through his Get Hired podcast, which he has kindly had me on a few times, he and his team help thousands of people get jobs and advance careers. Well, welcome, Andrew. It's great to be back with you. Thank you for hosting us in this beautiful studio of yours.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to have a conversation that's part of our Catalyze Your Career mini-series sponsored by LinkedIn. Should we get started?
I'd love to.
Clearly, the world is changing in terms of how people find jobs and the tools they use. And I'm not just talking about AI. I'm curious, what are you seeing is changing in the world of job search, and what should people be thinking about?
Right now, it's definitely like a transition period. Obviously, we have a lot of things happening in the macro economy. So you have hiring that is stable-ish, but we see dips and accelerations here or there, but it's not an easy time to be a job seeker right now. And then you also have the fact that a lot of places aren't hiring. They weren't doing that already, but then at the same time, you have companies that are being a little bit more cautious.
Sure.
So you have those factors at play, but then you also have sort of this looming idea of AI. And we don't know what we don't know. So it's hard to say exactly when and how people will be affected by it. We know that it's already having an impact on some people. So there's so many different things at play and it's uncertain. And then you also have a lot of people who are going to be graduating soon.
Right.
So it's going to be a really competitive market. I think overall on LinkedIn, we've seen a 45% increase in applications overall.
Wow.
So,
for here.
Yeah. So you have a lot of competition going on for jobs that aren't as plentiful as people would hope.
Right. And so really thinking about your strategy and your approach can be really helpful. You know, part of my teaching job is to prepare my MBA students for not just their impending careers, but for their job searches. And when I speak with them, I break down job searching into 4 I's: identifying a potential job, investigating the company and the role, and then initiating contact and applying, and then finally interviewing. I'd love for you to use my 4I structure to help me answer some of these questions. So what are the things that job seekers can do and what tools can they leverage to help with each stage? So when it comes to identification, what are some things you would recommend that job seekers do and what tools are available to help them?
The first one is definitely sort of being inquisitive. I think knowing what's out there, knowing what resonates with you. So utilize your network. Obviously, you could do that on LinkedIn, but there are so many different ways. You could reach out to friends and family. You could reach out to former coworkers. And I think the trick is to be genuine in those outreaches because so many people, they do an outreach, but it's more or less like, hey, I saw a job at your company. Give me a job.
Right.
And nothing makes a networking conversation or a conversation sort of spoil faster, or even a whole relationship, because that person just ends up feeling used. So what I often tell people is just let your genuine curiosity sort of guide you, and, let people know like, hey, I'm looking for work, and see what they offer you, and say, oh, you should talk to so-and-so because they have this really cool job at, Bank of America or something like that. But whatever you do, when you ask and you sort of, bring someone in for a conversation, be more interested in them. And obviously you could end with, I'm looking for new opportunities. So if you have any suggestions, please let me know. Like, don't make too big of an ask. Asking for information is totally valid, and it's a light lift for that other person. But I think that's the biggest part. And also, like, what I tell people is, search on LinkedIn. Our search is changing right now. So we're going to be rolling out over 2025, but it's AI job search. So traditionally, when you job search, you would sort of say, I want to be an accountant, and I want to be an accountant in Savannah, Georgia. And then there'd be other filters that said, I want to work at a big company, or, these are the requirements that I have. And, you had to be pretty good at searching, and you could set up an alert and all that other stuff. But the way that our engineers are now making the search work is through basically natural language. So it's an AI job search. And what you could say is you could basically say, okay, I want to work in accounting in Savannah, Georgia, and I'd like a minimum salary of whatever. And this tool basically goes into LinkedIn's files and says, okay, we have these positions. Here you go.
Right.
So it's much more natural.
So it sounds to me like the key to identifying potential jobs is through conversation, rather than direct request. And that those same skills you might use when I'm talking to a friend or a friend of a friend, I can use with AI, and that will also help me find the things that I'm looking for. So taking the time to be thoughtful about identifying the jobs and not being so direct and blunt, perhaps, at least with people, could be helpful.
Yeah.
So the second step I talk to my students about is investigating, doing the research, because if you are going to get an interview, it's important to know.
Yeah.
What advice do you have about how people can better investigate the companies and the roles that they're interested in?
I think, again, it comes back to conversations. Nothing's going to give you better information than someone who's living that experience.
Sure.
So you want to look for people who are at that company who are maybe in a similar role. And even if there's not a job open or they're not advertising for a role, you want to reach out and just sort of set up those conversations and say, hey, would you be open for a 10, 15-minute conversation? These conversations could be super beneficial, because even if you don't know that person, if you get in front of them or you have a good conversation with them, they could give you a lot of information about what their day-to-day is like, what the company's like. Are there any green flags where, something really resonates with you? And you could use AI for that too. Like, you can sort of keep a running list of like, oh, here's a job description that I really like, add that to a file. And then you could have like AI analyze it and come up with sort of like, here are the main things that, people are looking for in this field or profession. So it's really doing digging and sort of coming up with like a good idea of what the companies are, what they're looking for, and then finding out what it's actually like on the ground.
I think this investigation is really important. And I really like that idea of starting to flag job descriptions that you see and start looking for what's common across them that might be attracting you.
Yeah.
In a previous conversation you and I had, we talked about coming up with questions. And I think as you investigate a role or a company, really thinking through your questions to get at what you're really interested in is important. A lot of people, I think, stay too high level with their questions, but being really specific can give you important insight. So let's move to the third step in the 4 Eyes model, which is really initiating contact. What advice do you have about how do you actually set up the first meeting or ask for that meeting? How does contact initiation work?
It works in a few different ways. So obviously, what I would say is like, look at the job description, see what it says. On LinkedIn, there are a few tools that they've rolled out recently that can be beneficial. So one thing that we've been hearing a lot from people is basically that, they don't know if a job is real. And, people get those text messages. I don't know if you do, but like, hey, I'm a recruiter for so-and-so. And there are all these scams. But so on LinkedIn, they wanted to basically give people more reassurance that like, this is a real job. This is a company that's actually looking. So now when you go into the job descriptions or you see like job search results, there'll be like little notes that say, oh, this is a verified job.
Oh, interesting.
They're actively looking at resumes. This is how long it takes to get back to you. So it might also even say like the person who's hiring for the role if they're a recruiter. So make sure that you're actually looking at the whole job posting to get a sense of like, can you use any additional information from there? My biggest piece of advice is first apply, because a recruiter can generally not do anything until your information is in the system. So a lot of times people will see a job post on LinkedIn or somewhere else and they'll say, ooh, who do I know there? And it's great to work those channels, but also you want to make sure your application gets in as soon as possible. And then what you can do is then use your contacts and say, hey, I saw this job, I applied, can you give me any insight? And even if they give you a referral afterward, like usually, that person could message the recruiter and say, hey, I know this person. Can you add me as a reference? What I would also say is like, if they list the recruiter, if they list any other details, you can find them also on LinkedIn and say, send them a message and say, hey, I just applied for this role. I'm really interested in it. Almost like, your cover letter.
Right.
So make sure that you're sending those messages. Even if they don't reply to you, it's still worth your time to do that.
What I'm hearing there that I think is so important, many things you said are really important, but putting yourself in the position of the recruiter or gatekeeper is really important, because we think as soon as I see a job I want, I'm going to try to find connections and figure out how I can get that job. But in fact, there are well-known procedures that those companies and those jobs have to follow. And if you're not playing that game, if you will, you're in trouble. So I like that idea of work your network, but make sure you get it through and make sure that you're using language that is enticing, because essentially it's like a movie preview. You're trying to get people interested and excited to take a little more time. And thinking of it that way, I think changes everything, because many people just want to list and itemize instead of saying, hey, here's something I've spent some thought on.
Yeah. And I think we've talked about this before, and it's something that I've been telling a lot of people, think outside the box of like, don't just think that just because you've been an accountant your entire life that you have to be an accountant now.
Yes.
And what I sort of suggest to people is if you're making a career change, but also even if you're not, have your narrative that supports why you're the best candidate for these roles, and make sure you're leading with that with your messages. Because if you just say, hey, I'm interested in this role, you might get a look, but they may not look too deeply. They might say, okay, you probably sent that to 15 other recruiters. But if you have the narrative that says, listen, yes, I'm making a career change, but here's why it's beneficial to me, or you sort of set it up as saying like, I was made for this role, whatever, your story is, I think it makes them think twice and say, oh, you're worth 15 seconds instead of 5.
I think it's not just for people changing careers, but somebody who's starting a career to really think through what is the story you tell versus what are all the qualifications and checkboxes I do, and taking the time to do that as you initiate contact are important. We've talked certainly a lot about interviewing in the previous episodes. I'd like you to focus your response on how have the tools changed? Are we approaching interviewing differently now versus the way we might have?
I do think we've moved into a space where it is more conversational, where it is more of a conversation of like, is this the right fit for both of us? I think that's a good thing, because, employment is sort of a business agreement and you won't want both parties to be happy. The other thing is I think we have many more tools to sort of analyze what they're actually looking for. So obviously job descriptions are super powerful. Not all job descriptions are great. Usually, what I tell people is, and actually I'll get asked quite a bit, like, who writes these? And I'll usually say, what happens is I said some hiring manager who's never written a job description before in their life will write down the requirements that they want. They'll pass it along. It'll get cut and paste into something else that already existed. And I said, you end up with this Frankenstein thing that isn't perfect. But somewhere in there are the nuggets of what that hiring manager wants. So just like we sort of talked about earlier, analyzing a bunch of different job descriptions, you do want to sometimes really take a look and say like, okay, what in here is very specific? And I think those are the pieces that will actually come from the hiring manager. Like LinkedIn, we have now a tool called Job Match. And essentially when you're looking at a job job description, you could sort of say, what does AI think? Am I a fit for this role?
Oh, interesting.
And it'll show you, these are your weak points. These are your strengths, or, this is where you align on your application. So it can actually show you like the things you need to address or prepare for in an interview, to say like, I'm not really good with conflict management right now, but I've been taking courses to, figure out how to actually do that. So that way, when I do take charge of a team, I'll be prepared.
I hear two really important things there, that the actual interview itself is a conversation. And it's a conversation that these days, I think two things are true. It's a little more equal in terms of status. So I'm not letting the employer really run the show. I have to take an active part. And I think they're a little less formal. I think ever since the pandemic, these things have become just a little more informal, again, leaning into this idea of conversation. So as you prepare, you need to think, how do I have a conversation versus how do I just answer the questions? And I got excited when you talked about having a tool, an AI, help you see where you match and where you don't. And I think we can use a tool. I think we can use other people. But to really get some external validation or encouragement in areas where you might be deficient for that role, that can be really helpful because that sets you up for success. One of the things we've talked about in a previous conversation is looking at people's career paths. They're doing a job that you're interested in doing and seeing how they got there. That's another way of trying to figure out where could I focus my efforts to better qualify. So I really appreciate those two pieces.
And also, if I could just add,
sure.
One thing is, this is actually my favorite way to use this tool. When people are looking at a job description and they click that button, and if it says, you're not really strong with the majority of these requirements, and you look at it and say, but I am. And actually what it does is it uses all the information from your profile. So if you're not actually presenting yourself appropriately on your profile for the jobs you want, it can show where your weak points are. So maybe you don't think of something as a strength, or just there's something that's not occurring to you to actually put on your profile or advertise about your professional strengths. It can actually show you those holes in like how you're presenting yourself.
So Job Match doesn't only help you identify how good of a match you are for the job, but it helps you identify where perhaps your profile or the way you're presenting yourself could be strengthened. So you might say, I feel this is true about me, but the system is saying we don't see it. So then you have to, again, adjust your narrative. So going through the 4 I's of identification, investigation, initiating contact, and interviewing is really about being conversational, creating a narrative, and leveraging tools like AI to help. Do you have advice and guidance about how to simplify or make it at least less stressful and easier for job seekers?
Yes. I think the first thing is that you really need to have a strategic job search. So a lot of people, they think that the job search is a numbers game. And especially in this environment where you're facing hiring rates that are either going down or staying the same, while we're seeing increased competition. And it kind of leads to a vicious cycle because you end up just applying everywhere with very generic resumes that are not targeted. And then the result of that is that, you get more discouraged. So you send out more generic resumes and things like that. And it's just, it just keeps going and you feel worse and worse about yourself. So having sort of a targeted job search where you say, okay, this is what I want. And the way I recommend people do that is once they have those conversations and they sort of settle on, okay, I do want to work in sales in the healthcare industry. Find the positions that you're most interested in. And you could use that AI job search to say like, hey, I want to find sales jobs in healthcare in Tallahassee or something like that. And it'll give you a bunch of job descriptions and you could take those and put them in ChatGPT, any free AI tool, and say, how can I construct my resume? What is the most important traits of someone working in this area? And really focus your job search on selling yourself as that, coming up with that narrative of like, okay, here's where I'm coming from. here's how I'm pitching myself. And again, you could use AI for that. Like, don't ever take what it just spits out and say, hey,
Sure, of
here's my
course.
stuff.
Yeah.
But use it as almost like that job search coach, and use your time to really go after the jobs that you really want. And, that you hope that they'll just give you a moment, because right now, so many people are applying to all jobs. And in fact, that's one of the complaints I think we hear most from employers is like, we're just getting so many applications.
Right.
And that was actually one of the reasons we created Jobs Match, because we wanted people to be able to know whether or not they are actually a good match for that.
Right.
So what I hear from employers is the really good resumes stand out, because if you're going through so many that are so lackluster, when you find one that is actually like, oh, wow, this person checks most of my boxes and actually wants to do this work, it's just like the shining beacon for them. So put your effort into actually doing a job search that is going to lead to where you want to go. And then also understand that a successful job search is more than just applying. It's talking to people, it's setting up those conversations.
Right.
And I always suggest thinking of it as sort of odds. What can you be doing that is going to increase your odds of success? You're never going to be guaranteed anything or be guaranteed on a timeline. But what you could do is say like, okay, if I do X, it's going to give me a little bit more of an edge. And that will be networking. That'll be, taking courses online, or, even signing up for like, other courses in local colleges.
Right.
Volunteering to gain additional experience, or, also just taking time, to go for a walk. So like, it's really about just understanding that the job search process is a holistic thing. And a lot of people say, well, it's a full-time job. And I'll always tell them, yes, but a full-time job usually comes with weekends and like, a lunch hour. So don't be afraid to build those into it. Because all of those things will make your life more tolerable during a very difficult time. And then I think the most important part is have a support network.
All of that is really good advice. The defining of success of a job search is really important. It may or may not be getting that one job.
Yeah.
It might be planting the seeds that open up other opportunities. It might be connecting with a broader community that can lead to a job, or at least lead to support. I think we put a tremendous amount of pressure on ourselves when the solo goal of a job search is to find that job, instead of to make yourself a better candidate and to be open to the possibility of other things that come your way. And then that notion of being strategic, where instead of doing the shotgun approach and just sending out everything, really focus, can actually give you more of a sense of control and make it more manageable. So I think that advice is really good, because, getting a job is a wonderful thing. But if you get to that job fatigued and frustrated and stressed, then the best job is not going to at least start that well. Before we end, I'm asking everybody who's participating in this Catalyze Your Career mini-series the same two questions. Are you ready?
Yes.
What is the best career advice you've ever received, and why?
When I was younger, I remember someone who was a vice president of my college, and I felt really insecure about, even as a college journalist going in and interviewing people. He said, the benefit you have is that when you're new to a role or young, people will always underestimate you, and you could always over deliver. So even though I'm not young or new, I always tell myself that when I'm trying new things, because when you're new to something, people don't expect you to be good at it.
Right.
And I always sort of remind myself, I'm too neurotic not to do some homework. So I'm always going to at least over deliver beyond their expectation, their base level expectation. I think that's the best career advice I ever received.
Right. Leverage the newness and come at it with the focus on trying to be the best you can be, knowing that the expectations might be a little lower. Very good. Second and final question. What is the one thing you wish you would have done differently in the way you managed your career?
I think I would have been more proactive when I was younger, whether it was asking for raises or career development. My first raise as a full-time professional came to me because they felt bad for me because I had never asked for it. I literally went into like my yearly review, and I had recently changed managers at that point. And she goes, "We're giving you a raise." And I was like, "Oh boy." And she goes, "You've never asked for one." And I said, "I didn't think I had to." And I don't know why. It was just this weird thing where I was like, "Oh, I have to ask." And so I think I would be much more proactive in sort of like being an advocate for myself.
Being proactive and being an advocate, I think, captures a lot of what we talked about today, Andrew.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. The introduction to all these really cool tools, job match, AI assistance, the proactive approach, thinking about your job search as the narrative and that you have to tell about the identity you want to have moving forward. Really, really important advice. And I hope those listening can take value if they're looking for a job currently or if they're just thinking about what's next for them in their career. Thanks so much.
Thank you.